Houston Real Estate Radio with Shannon Register on the 950.
Welcome to Houston Real Estate Radio. I'm Shannon Register. Last weekend we were out at the Home and Garden Show, had lots of fun out there. It's always a great event. You can visit the Home and Garden shows around the Houston area. There, one weekend we were down at Reliant. This past weekend we were out in the Woodlands. This weekend we have some very interesting guests for you. We're going to do a spotlight on a local businessman. We have Steve Christensen joining us here in the studio to discuss septic systems. May not be something you hear about every day, but there's certainly a lot to know about them. Then we're going to have Mike Lesmeister. He is coming in from AmeriPro Lending. If you are thinking about buying a home, you definitely want to hear the answers to questions he is going to give you. Then we have a newcomer to the Houston area. Very interesting story. We have a gentleman that has journeyed south and want to get his perspective on moving into this Houston area from up north where it's very cold, coming down here where it's very hot and humid. He is a transplant to our Texas area, and we definitely want to get his perspective on that since there are so many people moving to our area now because we have such a great economy going on here in Houston. And then our last segment, we're going to wrap up with Jesse Brewer. He's going to be calling in. He is the author of Tenants Uncommon. It's a very interesting book that you definitely want to read, an easy read, and it is very interesting if you are a landlord or thinking about becoming a landlord. That is Tenants Uncommon. So welcome to the show. We also have one of our registered real estate advisors, agents, Jay Richardson, with us. So guys, we have some interesting conversation to talk about, don't we?
Yeah, we sure do.
So, Steve, you are a registered sanitarian specializing in sanitation and septic systems. What does all that mean?
Well, with a lot of the lots now in the rural area, you're going to be on some sort of a septic system rather than sanitary sewer like we're seeing in the city areas. And typically, if a lot is a half acre or greater size, you will be on some sort of a septic system. They're not a big deal. It's a matter of understanding what's going on and what's doing with them, which is what I like to have my clients on site for. And once it's explained, it's fairly simple, and they're trouble-free.
Now, do you install them or you inspect them?
Well, when you have one installed, you must have an engineer come out and prepare plans for that. I do the engineering work for them, but I do not get out there on the backhoe and dig the holes.
Okay.
No.
All right.
And obviously the inspection part of it, too.
So when someone's purchasing a home and it does have a septic system, you recommend they have it inspected?
Well, it's one of those things that if there is a problem with it, it can be very expensive to make repairs to it, and sometimes up to $10,000 to make a repair on it, and it's not something that's going to be obvious until you've occupied the home for a length of time before whether or not you'll know you're having a problem with it.
Interesting. All right. So give us an idea of what is a big problem that people have with septic tanks.
Well, obviously...
something to be aware of.
Right. Obviously a failing situation, obviously. And what I do is I introduce a measured amount of water into the septic system based on the size of the home, a number of occupants that are in there. And then I'm out checking for any type of situation where raw sewage is coming out on the ground, and preparing a map for our folks, because I do make a map for them because it's all buried under the ground, and preparing a report on the condition of how the septic system is functioning. And so it's fairly straightforward as far as that goes. So that's basically it.
So you give them a map of the septic system,
yes,
so they know where not to dig.
Well, they know where not to build a barn.
Okay.
I've had people that have poured porches and poured concrete right over the top of septic tanks because they didn't realize the septic tanks were under the ground there. Obviously, when I come out on that something, we've got an issue to resolve. So. Mm-hmm. So I do that map to help them in case they're going to contemplate construction outside, where to be careful.
Well, I'm curious. Can you explain to me what an aerobic system is?
Yes, sir. The aerobic system we're seeing a lot here in the Texas Gulf Coast due to our difficult soil conditions. And difficult soil conditions is clay and a lot of rainfall, 40 to 50 inches typically annual rainfall here in the Gulf Coast. And we have a sewage treatment plant that essentially works the same way, and it's been shrunk down for home. And we introduce air, we bubble air in through the wastewater, which allows a different microbe to exist in the wastewater, which will very quickly digest, treat, and clean up, make it nice. It comes out of this aerobic treatment tank as a clear, odorless liquid, and raw sewage has a very obnoxious odor. And all that's been removed. We hit it with some chlorine to disinfect it, and then we literally sprinkle it out on the ground via sprinkler heads through a timered pump that's in a tank. And what's coming out of that sprinkler head indeed is not potable water, but it's very close to it. None of the smell, the pollution has been removed out of it, and we no longer have the soil in the septic equation anymore. We're not depending on the soil with the older gravity-fed systems where we had leach lines in the soil. So we treat it, clean it up, disinfect it, and we sprinkle it out on the ground.
That's great. The gravity-fed system is the one that was, I guess, that was the original septic system?
That was originally how we did that. And, if you have a good soil with a sandy soil, which is not common here in the Gulf Coast, you can still put one of those in, but that is the exception. Most of the sites we go on have difficult soils for that type of system, and so we go with the aerobic system. And, there's some pumps and equipment in there and electricity and some monitoring things that you have to do in there. But if you have a tough soil, this is the kind of system that's going to give you proper performance, and you're not going to have problems around your house with a sewage problem.
All right. Well, the cost difference, is it better to go with the aerobic?
It's purely a purely a site specific issue, and the engineer will come out and actually bore holes down in the ground to see what kind of soil we're dealing with. And like I said, most of the sites with that, there's really not an option, and you do get an occasional site where, especially by a stream bed in Harris County up along Spring Creek, there's about a quarter-mile buffer right along the northern border of Harris County, which is Spring Creek. And I'll go in there and I'll find nice sandy soil, and I'll tell the customer, hey, you've got a perfect soil for an older leach field system. If you want to, you can use that. But I get a lot of customers say, oh, no, I wanted the new modern aerobic system. So at that stage, with the proper soil, you at least have a choice. But with the soils, the majority of the soils, there's no choice. You're going to go to an aerobic type system.
What about the maintenance on a system? I mean, if you're just buying a home with this type of system, you've always lived in the city, you don't know what to do with a septic tank. What kind of maintenance is involved?
Well, the typical, and this is going to be for any type of system, occasionally having tanks pumped. The primary tank or the first tank coming out of the house is always going to have to collect solids, and there are always solids associated with our wastewater flows, and those need to be removed, be it an aerobic or an older leach field conventional type system. So occasional pumping is going to be at a bare minimum. Now, when we get into an aerobic system, then we start talking about other components in there. And because we are literally putting this stuff back out on the ground, the state does require, and this is through the TCEQ with the state of Texas, that a maintenance provider comes out there 3 or 4 times a year and does do a thorough check over of the system and fill out a report and send a copy to the homeowner and then a copy to the county. So the county is aware that the aerobic septic system they permitted on that lot is being properly maintained as required by state law. So the aerobic system does have a little more maintenance involved with it than the older gravity system. But in this case, you don't have an option because you have a site with bad soil on it. So there is a pumping, and pumping is universal no matter what kind of system to remove those solids out of that septic tank, be it an aerobic or a conventional septic system.
If your system is failing, let's say you want to buy a home, but the system's failing, and you're going to have to redo it. Can you go from an aerobic back to can you change the system, or are you just going to have to fix what you got?
Well, the aerobic systems are nice in the fact that usually really low dollars can make them whole again and fix them. They just have a few mechanical parts on them that can fail, a compressor, a pump, sometimes a control panel's bad. There's some float switches in there. So the aerobic systems are nice in the fact that they can be fairly easy repaired, whereas the older leach field system, if it's failing, then it's going to have to probably be replaced with an aerobic septic system at considerable expense, anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 depending on the lot. So when I go out on a site with an aerobic system, I know that it can all be fixed and made literally whole again. But when I go out on a site with a conventional septic system and we have a problem, then it's a big deal at that stage. It
So
really
they should
is.
consider
Well,
switching
there's
to
really
the new
not.
system. Or,
There's usually the reason that the conventional system is failing is it's an older home and it was put in before we had the newer modern aerobic septic systems, and then B, it's usually the soil that's causing the problem in the first place, so you won't have a choice. The replacement would be an aerobic system at that stage.
what about homeowners who've not lived with this type of system? They may not know the limitations. You can't just throw anything down the disposal, right? I mean, you have to be a little more careful with this system.
I get that question all the time. Because I'm on a septic system, that means I can't have a garbage disposal. Well, indeed you can, but you've got to realize that if you're going to grind up plates full of food, potato peelings, carrot peelings, etc., you're going to be filling that solids tank up much more quickly, so you're going to be pumping much more frequently. And it's not going away like it is with your sanitary sewer. It goes down the pipe and goodbye. It's going into that tank, and the solids have to stop in that tank because none of the septic systems can deal with solid particles. So, hey, if you want to do that, you're going to have the pumper guy out there pumping the tanks much more frequently.
And is there some warning that it needs to be pumped, or is the warning you start having some backflow into the house?
Well, no, that usually won't occur. But
Okay.
with the aerobic systems and the maintenance providers in there, they have a way of checking the solids level in the tank. And typically for a system that you're not using a garbage disposal with a typical family of 4, you might go 4 to 5 years between pumping. And the same thing with a conventional system. You know, you might go 4 to 5 years between pumpings in there. So it's not something that's done terribly frequently unless you're putting a lot of solids in the system. And then obviously your pumping frequency would be more frequent then, obviously. And then so you know, that kind of stuff in mind is going to be what we're looking at in that.
And you have to be careful with cleaning products, perhaps. There's certain things that aren't going to go well in a septic.
I tell people, please use the soft toilet paper. You know, don't, you know, the amount of cleansers you use for clean your bathtubs and your toilets, that they're not going to affect the septic system materially. Okay. And you know, it's just common sense type stuff. And most of it, when I explain it to folks, you know, hey, if you had an extra gallon of Clorox and you poured it down the drain, it might upset the process in there, certainly. You know, you've used a painting with an expensive brush or roller and you go wash all the paint down the drain, you know, that kind of stuff. And it's mostly common sense, but otherwise the cup or two of bleach you use in your whites and you spritz into the bathtub or the toilet or your cleansers are fine. That's not going to cause a problem with the system. There's pumping the tanks is the one thing that we really need to keep in mind, and that is the one thing that can cause problems with all septic systems if they're neglected that way.
Okay, I have one last question for you. We've got about 1 minute to wrap up. Wells. You inspect wells also.
That's
so
correct.
when someone is purchasing a home with a well, is that an important thing to inspect?
Well, certainly, you know, you can go in there and turn on the water. There's a number of other things that I do besides, you know, just going in there and turning on a faucet or two.
It's not just the water pressure. And
Yes, we do a water quality test, and that is required by Texas real estate law. A coliform analysis is what we call it, and that does determine whether or not we have potable water. And then obviously the condition of the surface equipment that services your well, the pressure tank. We get a lot of them that get a lot of rust on them, and there's some other electrical equipment in there that's involved with keeping the well pressure up. So there is a number of things that are involved with that, just besides going in and turning on a faucet in the house, yes.
All right, very good. Well, we appreciate you coming on the show and joining us. Steve Christensen, he is a registered sanitarian specializing in sanitation and septic systems. Lots of great information. And Jay Richardson from Register Real Estate Advisors, one of our realtors. We'll be back in a moment with Mike Lesmeister with AmeriPro Funding to answer all of your buying questions.